Hi, this is Don Devilak. You've reached the eighth video in our series, Getting Started, Going Forward with Sales. Now, this video is related to obtaining your funding time for a big time launch. Basically, what we've done so far in this video series is on going forward, preparing for sales, as we've covered the startup period, prototypes, market testing, gone through the beachhead period where you've established your product will sell, and now we've reached the stage where we're going to go for a big time launch, and we need to make sure we have enough funding to launch that. Hopefully, you can fund this yourself, but if not, there's definitely ways to raise that money. Sometimes people want to really stick themselves deeply in hawk, credit card debt, equity on their house, but rather than do that, try to spread your risk by taking on some investors. It's a lot better for you in case things go wrong, and also you get a lot more support, and it kind of cautions you from making any reckless moves. First of all, don't take anything for granted. I mean, don't assume you can get the money. You're going to have to work hard to get the money. Really, one of the reasons I've had you networking and going to association meetings and going to trade shows is gathering up industry people that might be willing to invest in you, but also gathering up the people you need that show that you really have a strong case for moving forward and that you have support in the industry. But by now, hopefully, you reach this stage with a lot of information for a dynamite presentation. You've had a beachhead, you've had a successful prototype, you have industry insiders, you have everything going for you. Now, we're going to go into the stock a little bit later in the presentation, but what should you value your company at? Usually about 5 to 10 times your investment. These are just rough terms, and it's all a negotiated matter. But if you've invested like $20 to $30,000, maybe your company is worth 100 to 150,000. You can triple your investment if you include all your family and friends. Hopefully, you've gotten a kind of some of your family to invest, or maybe you've taken out some loans as far as equity, and then you can triple your investment for owning about 20% shares of the company. And you need to leave at least 50% of the stock open for other people. So when you start out with a company or your company, you're going to want to say, like, well, I have 2 million shares of stock. Now, maybe you'll take 250,000 shares as the founder, and then maybe with your family and friends or whatever you might, for your early investors, you might have 100,000 shares or 150,000 shares, but usually more like 100,000 shares. And then you have all these other shares remaining that you can sell at a later date. You want to tell people that look at you own 10% of the company now, you have 100,000 shares, for example, and there's a million shares outstanding, but I have another million shares to sell later. And if we sell those shares later, then your percentage ownership of the company will go from 10% down to 5%. Make them aware that if you have additional investors, their shares won't go down, but their share of the company will go down. Basically, this is one of the pitfalls I think a lot of inventors fall into, is that when they actually sell stock to an early investors and they tell them they own 10% of the company, that person thinks they own 10% of the company forever. What they own forever is the number of shares, but your number of shares could go up as you raise more money. So then once you get kind of your position together, and we have some more slides going into this in a little more detail later. I know it's a little confusing right now, but you're going to present to your prospects. You'll set a minimum level of sales, and you want to be open, and some people are going to come, especially if you're dealing with a manufacturer or a distribution channel member, and they're going to want to maybe do a joint venture. So keep yourself open to that. You want to start out by relying on free to low cost resources. Now, basically, every state has a little bit different laws. You really need a lawyer when you're going to start to sell shares more than to, family and friends. And once you really start getting money from outsiders, you really need to have your ducks in a row. but start with your local Small Business Development Center. This is again sponsored by the Small Business Administration. It's free consulting, and they can give you a lot of advice about how to set up your organization. Almost every state will have local entrepreneur clubs or groups that help capital funding. For instance, in Minnesota, we have a group called Minnesota Innovates, and we also have a group called the Minnesota Inventors Club. These are all groups geared to try and help young startups get the funding and support they need to succeed. Your local college, or which could be a large college, also the business schools often provide assistance to entrepreneurs as a way for their students to really learn more about business and how to prepare business plans and really get things going. One of the reasons, by the way, going back to the Small Business Development Centers, is they'll help you put together a package to get SBA funding. So sometimes you can get a loan for your money rather than having to actually take on new investors. I've mentioned before SCORE. This is another organization sponsored by the Small Business Administration. They have retired executives that can help you. Before going to a lawyer, go to your local lawyer associations. For instance, the Minnesota Legal, I think it's the Minnesota Legal Council, but almost every state will have a group of lawyers and associations together. Often these groups will have a program, of low-cost help for startups to help you get going so you don't have to pay the large legal bills. Always check on that, and your Small Business Development Center can also probably steer you to any organizations within your state that have special programs to help with funding for small businesses. Now, whenever you do funding, always start with your distribution channel and manufacturers. You have to realize if your product really succeeds in a big way, if you've chosen your distribution partners and manufacturers carefully so you have a big impact on them, they have a lot to gain from your success. If you can add 10 to 15% production capacity to a manufacturer, you're just not only increasing his profits on your product, you're increasing his product's profitability on his other products because you're really taking his overhead and having it being absorbed over a much broader product line. So basically, overhead is just what the manufacturers call, rent, production, facilities, their interest payments, depreciation, sometimes the administrative staff. All those costs are a big cost that never goes away for the manufacturer. So what they do is they spread that cost out on each product. So for example, one typical way is to say machine hours. So they might say, I have a $50 to $100 per hour charge on a machine hour to cover overhead. Now, if you increase their production capacity, so all of a sudden, let's say that $100 drops down to $70, that helps your product, of course, because you're going to get a lower price, but it also increases the manufacturer's profitability on the rest of his profit line or product line. So, if you've really got something going, you've presented all the success of the manufacturer, go to the manufacturer and, see if you can borrow money from them. They might give you a loan, or maybe they'll take on an investment for 10 or 15% of the company for a certain amount of money from you. So always start with them. They have the most to gain, and they're definitely going to be interested if they see that you really are going to increase their overall profitability. When you start going to a distribution channel, they also might loan you money on an exclusive agreement, or they might agree to invest in the company, or they might ask for a joint venture. Also, before you go to outside investors, you should always talk to your industry insiders, people you know in the market, your contacts. Tell them that you're seeking investors and just ask them if they want to participate. Now, many of them won't be in a position to participate or won't want to, but that's okay. You don't want to go on and get investors and then find out an industry insider really would have liked to have been one of those investors. Now, where do you find, other investors? So you have family, friends, people, but if you're going to need to branch out and get investments, how do you find them? Well, one is you need to participate in the entrepreneur clubs. Minnesota Innovates. Check with your small business development center and see which kind of organizations exist in your state. It's very important to find those companies, be a part of them. Go to those meetings even a year before you actually need money. Start with them right away when you start getting your invention out. If you can't find out from the Small Business Development Center, area business journals will also typically list all the types of events where inventors or entrepreneurs can present their ideas. You can also check with the business writers at local newspapers. Just ask them what are the organizations that would help a new entrepreneur raise money. Chamber of Commerce also is much more valuable than most people think. They have accountants there, lawyers there, and a lot of big companies there. But those accountants and lawyers, they have contacts. They know companies. They know investors. So network with as many people as you can. And what you're really looking for in most of these investments are done by, I don't know exactly what to call them, but they're kind of investor finders. And what they do is they get on board with your product. Maybe they make a small investment, but then they find these other investors for you. Now, usually you have to pay them like a 10% commission, for the money they do bring in. But they do have contacts with investors, and most companies who raise money in the private placement or early stages actually use people like this to get their funding. Sometimes you'll just find one investor who will really get on board and he'll bring in his friends, but sometimes you need to use these intermediaries. Of course, now if we're going to go out to outside investors, you're going to start with a more detailed investor plan presentation than you put together before. Again, don't go crazy and make all these things go on too long, but now you want about a 20 to 25-minute presentation. You want to start with a very high impact statement, why your product will have a strong market presence. Again, this is take your main benefit of your product, why that doesn't work, or why it's necessary, and why it will help your product sell. You have to have a product photo and maybe the two main benefits. So what you want to do is really go into just what are the real highlighted benefits. Remember, these investors, they're not going to listen for a long time, so really focus on just high-level information. Define your target market, your end user, and your distribution plan. So you want to define both of those clearly for the company. You want your positioning strategy versus competition. So this is what makes you different. What is you going to say about your product that makes it stand out from the competition? A brief product history, why you created the product and how it's been developed. It's very good to have a competitive products chart where you're showing how your product is different from other products. Current status, where you are in the marketplace, and this would be that you've had a successful beachhead, you have industry insiders, you have market research, and what you expect to do next. So here you're going to be talking about, I'm going to be launching at these target customers, which is going to be coming up a little bit later in video 10. You're going to summarize your current sales efforts, and you're going to talk about all the support you have in the market. You're going to talk about your product price. Then, of course, you're going to talk about your production costs. And here, something where the investors are going to be really interested in is what is your margin. Now, the investors are going to be looking at your product, and if you don't say you have a margin for your wholesale price of 50 or 60%, they're really not going to be that interested. So you'll need your production cost really to be about 20% of the eventual end user price if you're really going to show a high probability of success. And then what you want to have is the equity chart, which is on our next slide. Now, when you get this, is kind of the heart and soul of every investor presentation, and it's the heart and soul is what I was talking about earlier about the value of the company, the number of shares you're going to own, the number of shares you're leaving open. So the current equity position for a company, and this is just a sample, the founder stock is 250,000 shares. Now, just because you didn't put any money up or you're running around getting money doesn't mean the founder doesn't still deserve a hefty percentage of the equity. In this case, our founder didn't put up any money, so he's not in the best position to really hold on to shares. But as you can see, he still hold on to quite a bit of shares. Then you're going to list the stock that you sold here. In this case, 30 cents. This is the early money that you brought into the company in order to make your prototypes, get your patents. And you can see that the inventor sold here 140,000 shares at 30 cents. So he brought in $42,000 in order to get through the phase one. Then we're having a second phase, and this is where the inventor was really going into the beachhead period. And here he sold stock for 75 cents, and you can see he sold 90,000 shares. So he brought in about a little under $70,000 to get through the whole beachhead, get his temporary tooling, have the cash flow to going on. And now he's going into the major market, and he's going to have sell stock at $2 per share. He's going to sell 75,000 shares. So then he lists the total capitalization. So his total number of shares now that's outstanding is 555,000 shares, and his capitalization is 1.1 million. Now, normally, if you're a company, your value is about 5 to 8 times your profitability. So that that profitability there is saying that you're going to make about $200,000 per year. Now, of course, you're not going to make $200,000 per year in your first year, maybe not in your second year, but by the third year, you need to be making that much for the company to really show this much value. So when we come back in some of these other videos that are upcoming and we talk about setting your targets, setting your target customer groups, getting your sales rep strategies in line, everything has to be geared to the fact that you've really valued your company on the basis of making about $200,000 a year. So you can't be having such small sales channels, and you can't have such a modest marketing effort that you can't hit that $200,000. Everything has to coordinate. Now, this equity position chart, this is the key really to getting investors, and you really kind of like to show this to all your investors, so because it really kind of summarizes how the funding process goes, and it gives people an idea of how their shares are percentage of ownership of the company is changing as time goes on. I find that this chart is really the key to getting investments. And so you're going to say now you need to sell 75,000 shares now. Most people would take, say that you have to buy a minimum of 25,000 shares. Now, of course, all these numbers can change substantially depending on your invention and how much money you need. You might need a lot more money, then you're going to have to sell more shares. But this equity position really kind of focuses in on the money you need and what you're going to have to do to set up the company. Now, in this particular case, when you're looking at this stage and you're saying that you want to have 555,000 shares at the end of, when you're going to market, you'd still want to have about 2 million shares in your company stock, because it just gives you more flexibility. If later on you need more money, you can go and get the more money, and you have a legal structure set up to do that.